Hey everybody, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. I have about a week left before I start college again, which means I'm finishing up all the books I'm going to read by choice for a while. And I wanted to hop on here a little early to talk about Small Things Like These by Keegan, which I mentioned I was going to did read, finished this a few days ago actually. And then I'm in the middle of two books right now, Lost in the City by Edward P. Jones, short story collection, and a novel, White Noise by DeLillo. So I'm going to talk about this at the end of the video. Once I'm done with that, I'm only like 100 pages in. And then I'm going to try to do a separate video for White Noise, which I'm loving so far. Maybe I'll put in the title of this video if it's a new favorite, because this one will come out first. It really feels like it could be a new favorite book. It's just wonderful. But I'm going to talk about it with my dad, actually. We're reading it at the same time, which has been really cool to kind of get to go through it and talk about it. He's read it before. It's one of his favorites. Probably that and Cloud Atlas are his two favorite books, neither of which I read before. So that has been a lot of fun. And somebody had mentioned, because I bring him up a lot, because my dad has a huge influence on the things I read, and me even reading in general, that we could maybe do a video together. So that should be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for that. I'll kind of have that video, this one, and a video going over what I'm going to be reading for the semester, all kind of coming out around the same time. I know it's been a little while since I put out any videos. I've just been, sorry about the cicadas. I know it's been a little while since I put out any videos, but I am working on all of those, and it might be another week still, just because I have to finish these two. But anyway, let's talk about Small Things Like These. So Small Things Like These by Keegan. I'm gonna talk about how much I love the book, and then kind of talk about the issue that is confronted in this book, which is kind of a spoiler. I would say it's kind of cool to go in knowing it. I did go in knowing it, but I'll forewarn, and you can turn it off if you don't want that spoiler. Again, Keegan is one of those authors that's hard to spoil because the beauty is in the writing, very similar to like Edward P. Jones and even DeLillo. It's just, she's so incredible with words that you're so immersed in it. It really gives you a beautiful feeling. As much as this is a book that dives into the horrors and some of the most awful structures within society, it also is a warm, cozy Christmas book. So I know that sounds ridiculous. When you read it, you'll kind of understand, but if you have read it, let me know if you agree. But it's about a man named Bill Furlong, and again, it's been a couple days since I finished this, so hopefully I get this all right. It's about a man named Bill Furlong in Ireland in the winter of 85 or 86, coming up on Christmas season. He is the son of a woman who got pregnant very young. He doesn't know who his father is. This is a huge deal there, as you will see later on. And they are both taken in by this well-off elderly widow who his mother works for. His mother passes away very young, and then the widow kind of raises him. And he really builds a good life for himself. He's a coal merchant. He has 3 daughters, a wife, a wonderful family, gets along with everybody because he sells to all of them. And though Ireland is in a bit of a crisis at the time economically, and a lot of people are struggling, he's doing really well, and you're kind of put in this position, and he's kind of, towards the beginning, he's ruminating on things, which I think is the most beautiful part of Keegan's writing, because you really, if you can, I'm kind of a antsy person, like to see things happen, like to move with the story, but if you can like really focus on each word, just immerse yourself in the writing, it's such a beautiful experience. I don't really know how to describe it other than that, but she's an incredible writer, and like I said, I've read one of her short story collections. I hope to read a lot more of her stuff, but this is her longest work, I believe. It's like 110 pages, but the font is small, the pages are short, so it's not really that long. And yeah, it's wonderful. So I will just say that I love this. I'm honestly more excited to reread it than I was to read it, because I honestly think the second read is going to be better. There's certainly things you always miss with Keegan's writing. And I think that she's someone who I would really recommend to anybody trying to write, along with Edward P. Jones for sure. Anybody learning to write, someone who's helped me a lot. I'm obviously nowhere near where I'd like to be, or nowhere near either of these people. I'm just saying that I've gotten a lot out of the structure of their writing, and she in particular is so incredible at evoking feelings, really relating to, she kind of writes all about the same subject, which tends to be working class Ireland, farmers in Ireland, but she really dives in and finds the beauty in family structure, in life, and as well as the hardship in it. So anyway, I will talk about kind of the main problem here, kind of the big surprise or what's addressed in this book, which is the Magdalen Laundries. I think that's how you say it. I could be totally off. But it was a structure of the Irish Catholic Church in which women who had babies without being married, especially younger girls, were essentially, from what I can tell, enslaved by basically by nuns in a convent, and had to do all this work. And it was kind of known by some people and not known by others, but nobody really talked about it. And it was an awful, awful thing that I think lasted until 1996, was when the last one shut down. And I cannot believe I've never heard of this. I mean, I if you've heard of it, let me know. Like, maybe I'm just a little out of the loop, but it seems wild that this is not talked about more. And so Bill Furlong, who, like I said, is a coal merchant, well off in this place where the church is very, very powerful, he's not as aware as other people might be of what's going on. And given his history with his mother and the way that she could have been sent to one of these and he could have been in a very, very bad situation, a lot of babies died in these institutions, I think he discovers some girls, still doesn't really know what's going on, and has to make a decision. It's really interesting now because he has worked incredibly, incredibly hard. He was in a very tough position and has worked his way up to a place where he's able to support his family better than most people in Ireland at this time. And he has to make a decision if he's going to try and address this issue or not, save one of the girls he meets. That's kind of the idea of the story. Now, again, there's a lot of intricate details within this story. If you've listened to everything I've said so far, it's really not spoiling anything. You know, obviously, the big issue that's being addressed, but I will just say that, man, I'm going a little fast. I think I've had too much caffeine today. But man, the interactions between him and his wife, between him and his kids, there's a lot of great quotes in here. I didn't want to mark it up because I really like this copy of the book. Here's one quote I really like, though. What was very interesting is that the reason I said it was a spoiler is because the first half of the book is really just focused on the characters, their mental state, the thoughts in their minds, the relationships, and it doesn't really, you don't see what's coming at all. She sets the stage very well for the kinds of people that are in the story, what's troubling them at the time. And here's one of the things that Furlong thinks. Always it was the same, Furlong thought. Always they carried mechanically on without pause to the next job at hand. What would life be like, he wondered, if they were given time to think and reflect over things? Might their life be different or much the same, or would they just lose the run of themselves? Even while he'd been creaming the butter and sugar, his mind was not so much upon the here and now, and on this Sunday nearing Christmas with his wife and daughters, so much as on tomorrow, and who owed what, and how and when he'd delivered what was ordered, and what man he'd leave to which task, and how and where he'd collect what was owed. And before tomorrow was coming to an end, he knew his mind would already be working in much the same way, yet again, over the day that was to follow. So, despite the position he's in, he's kind of feeling a lack of importance in his life, kind of feeling like everything's the same. This sets up the tension that continues to build up towards the end. Overall, I don't have much more to say on the book. I think that everybody should read Claire Keegan. She is so, so good. She's the exact type of fiction I love, where it's a mix of great stories, people that feel so real, incredible detail, incredible prose. Every word is where it should be, it feels like. Everything is so perfect. I don't really know how many drafts she does, things like that, but I'd imagine she does a lot of editing. She is very talented, though, so who knows? But yeah, I mean, this won the Orwell Prize, shortlisted for the Booker. Yeah, I mean, this is great. Okay, I promise that I thought of this subconsciously because I had read this quote before, but the front cover says every word is the right word in the right place, and the effect is resonant and deeply moving. So maybe I just copied that subconsciously, but that is how I feel. Really, really well done novella, short story, and I can't wait to read more of her stuff. I know there's a film adaptation. If anybody's seen it, let me know if it was good. I love The Quiet Girl, which is an adaptation of her short story Foster, another one of her longer works, which I haven't actually read, so I already know that story, but I definitely want to read it. Anyways, Claire Keegan's incredible. I can't wait to get to these two books. White Noise with My Dad, Lost in the City by Edward P. Jones later on in this video. I'm sorry that there's cicadas going crazy, that I'm talking very fast. Lots of caffeine, end of summer. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this so far. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments on the book, on anything, any recommendations you have, anything at all really. And thank you guys so much for watching so far. I'll be back soon with Edward P. Jones. Alright, so Lost in the City by Edward P. Jones. I have finished maybe 10 of the 14 stories so far. I did skip around towards the end because the shorter ones I'll read at nighttime and whatever. But I just wanted to talk about it because I'm leaving for school tomorrow. I don't even want to show you, but my bed's a mess. I've got stuff everywhere, trying to pack. And I just wanted to kind of do this video, talk about this, because I do have a lot of thoughts, and then get sorted with everything at school. So yeah, that's kind of the plan. I had an eye procedure yesterday, so that made it a little rough to read. I did film the video with my dad on White Noise, gonna put that out soon. But feeling good today. I was able to record some music this week, which maybe I'll throw in some of these videos. I haven't quite been able to share any short stories yet because there's nothing I'm really proud of. Or I'm proud of it, but nothing I'm really like wanting to share quite yet. And that's obviously the main thing I care about, but I do also write songs and whatnot, so maybe I'll throw some of those in here. Anyway, I'm rambling, but I do have a lot to say about Lost in the City. Edward P. Jones is an extraordinary writer. I mean, just, you talk about next level, like this is it. The first Edward P. Jones story I ever read was from All Aunt Haggard's Children, his last collection, which was still a while ago, maybe 2005, something like that. I don't actually remember the story name, but I remember my teacher. This is maybe my favorite teacher I've ever had. He's an incredible writer. I love his work. And he said the first time he ever read Edward P. Jones, he said he went to his teacher, whatever this was, like I think he took a workshop in his 20s when he was first writing, and said, what's the point? Like, why should I try? Like, if people like this exist, if somebody who can write a short story like this exists, like, what does the world need I'm never going to come close to this. So it's pretty funny. I think he's a great writer, and I'm glad he stuck with it. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but I mean, really, like, everything feels so perfect. Obviously, I love Claire Keegan beginning of this video. White Noise was probably a 5-star read for me this month. But Edward P. Jones, there is nothing like this. Again, I'll say this, like, for anybody learning to write, like, perfect. There's a lot of things he does that are kind of hard to emulate with, like, the passage of time, things that it feels like only Edward P. Jones can do. Obviously, there are other writers, but something that, like, I feel like I could never. The first story, which I want to say it was my favorite, but it was probably just because the first one I read and I was like, oh my god. It's called The Girl Who Raised Pigeons, and the way time flows throughout of it. First of all, the titles are awesome. The Girl Who Raised Pigeons is really interesting, and the way he starts every story is fascinating. I don't like to think of myself as too much of a nerd, but when I stay up late watching Edward P. Jones interviews, then, you know, maybe I am. But anyway, I was watching one of his interviews and he said, you know, people have so much to do, so little time to do it. You've got to hook them right away. You got to be like, you got to have them say, this is worthy of my time. This story by this person who I've never met. Like, and he really does do that. So I'm just going to read you the first line from The Girl Who Raised Pigeons. Her father would say years later that she had dreamed that part of it, that she had never gone out through the kitchen window at 2 or 3 in the morning to visit the birds. By that time in his life, he would have so many notions about himself set in concrete. And having always believed that he slept lightly, he would not want to think that a girl of 9 or 10 could walk by him at such an hour in the night without him waking and asking of the dark, "Who is it? What's the matter?" One, you're kind of like, what's going on here? And that you immediately want to read more because it's such an interesting way to start a story. Her father would say years later, that's also kind of the time thing. That's not what I'm really talking about when he kind of goes from when she's like 9 to 10 to 11 and it just happens like that and you feel like you see all of it. But here, Edward P. Jones is focusing on, he establishes something about the father's character, something that seems really interesting. By that time in his life, he would have so many notions about himself set in concrete, and having always believed that he slept lightly, he would not want to think. I feel like it's not really something I've ever thought of, but at the people do tend to look back on things and maybe revise what happened based on how they see themselves. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So you kind of see really interesting story idea, possibly what's going to happen, and then you also see, this guy sees something about humans that maybe I miss sometimes, but is kind of there. I think even the second story was a really short one, maybe the first day. Was it short? I don't remember how short it was. Yeah, it was really short. And maybe that's a good one to start with. If you can, I think it's online, and I definitely send it to somebody because I've been just obsessed with this book for a little while now. So, on an otherwise unremarkable September morning, long before I learned to be ashamed of my mother, she takes my hand and we set off down New Jersey Avenue to begin my very first day of school. It's long before I learned to be ashamed of my mother. And you want to read more. You're like, why is she ashamed of her mother? Is that character referencing that teenage stage where you're embarrassed of your parents, or is she like really ashamed? You learn some really interesting facts. I'm not going to talk about that one necessarily because it's so short, but she really is ashamed, and in a way that, I guess I'll mention this, like I think that Edward P. Jones' mother didn't know how to read. I think that was a thing, and that's part of the issue in this story too. So it's very fascinating, and he seems to write. This is another thing that's a huge deal. I mean, all his stories kind of take place in Washington, D.C., I believe. The locations are so, like the streets, you can see the streets. Everything feels so real, not just the characters, but the location, the way he describes things. And it's really interesting because I was reading a New York Times article about a politician who said something like Washington, D.C. is just a district because, it's all white-collar people, working bureaucrats, like things like that. And he is kind of, and I guess I never really thought about it, but maybe that is kind of what I would think about DC, but he really investigates. First, all his characters are black. Most of them are also working class. My favorite story, I think, was a man who worked in not a convenience store, like a grocery store, and took it over, and that was called, I think that was just called The Store. Yeah. The Store was awesome. The night Rhonda Ferguson was killed, that was an awesome title. Things like that, where it's like he kind of spoils the detail in the title itself, but that's not really. The stories also all feel like total novels. There's certainly some that are very short, 5 pages, 10 pages, and you get to 20 or a little higher. But everything, the examination of so many different characters, and the story that I was feeling I didn't enjoy the most, I don't even remember which one it was, but I was like, oh my god, he's introduced so many things. Like, I don't even know who this story's about. I like my stories to be like the stories I read, even the ones I write, to be more like focused on a central character and whatnot. But he's going all over the place, and then of course he just ties it together beautifully. And it feels like there could be a chapter on each paragraph, and that's what a great short story writer does, I think. And I've heard him say that he, his ideas aren't long enough for books a lot of the times. Like, they feel like they could be long enough. And it makes me wonder what his novel, The Known World, which is really well received. I can't wait to read that and kind of see how he takes on a much larger, I think it's like 400 pages, something like that. But yeah, so that one might be his best known work, and then All Aunt Hagar's Children, in which he kind of comes back. Even some of the characters in these stories pop up multiple times, but I think All Aunt Hagar's Children corresponds, like story to story. Certain characters from these stories are now there. All 28 stories take place in DC. I've read some from that collection just for class, but I've never read the collection itself. But I wanted to start with this first one. He's a really interesting writer because I don't think he writes a ton. Like he seems to have, he mentions like having these stories, even the novel, in his head for years and years, and then just being like, okay, now I'll write them. And so he's obviously hasn't done anything in quite a while, but he's such a remarkable writer, and he teaches, and just super, super interesting. And I think someone that deserves far more recognition than he gets. He certainly isn't out in the public often, and seems to want to let the writing speak for itself, which I think it should, but he doesn't get at all the attention that he should. I mean, he's just incredible. I would highly, highly recommend this collection, but if you're only going to read one, maybe look at his novel or his latter collection, which I know are supposed to be even better, but I love this. I would say you can't go wrong. Would highly, highly recommend Edward P. Jones. I'll read one final thing because I mentioned The Store and then I just stopped looking for it. But the ending of the store is beautiful, and I won't read because right before there is a spoiler, but he's looking back on this store that he worked at, and the place became a television repair shop after it stopped being a store. Then it became a Church of the Holy Rollers. But whatever it was over the years, I could, without trying very hard, see myself sitting in the window eating my lunch the way I did before I knew Kentucky, before, spoiler. In those early days at the store, I almost always had a lunch of one half-smoke heavy with mustard and a large bottle of Upper 10 and a package of Snowball cupcakes. I sat on the stone wall and watched myself as I ate my lunch and checked out the fine girls parading past the store, parading as if for me and me alone. So certain stories leave you with something like that, where it's just so direct and you can relate that to your own life. And Edward P. Jones is trying to represent a group of people that aren't often represented, being African Americans in Washington, D.C. But obviously, you're looking at humanity as a whole, and I'm not really interested in reading about somebody from Chicago goes to UW. Like, I'm living that life. And obviously there's experiences I've had that I want to incorporate in my writing, just like I'm sure Edward P. Jones does. But it's so much more interesting to read about people, characters, places that you've never been, that you don't really know, and that's how you really expand your worldview. And I think that that's what the goal of every reader should really be, and even every writer, is to, like, through writing you expand your worldview as well. And so I'm all over the place, but going back to that, like, that leaves you with such a sense of nostalgia, kind of, for an experience you might have had where it felt like as if for me and me alone, right? And it doesn't have to be a guy sitting outside a sandwich shop, a guy eating a sandwich outside a shop looking at girls, but it could be anything. And I feel like everybody can relate to certain things. And then, of course, other endings, and I don't know how he decides to end these stories, because they are perfect endings, but a lot of the times they're so random. Not random, but just like, you would never, as you're reading the story, you would never think it would end that way. And something like the night Rhonda Ferguson was killed, I remember, or was it Young Lions, no, it was the title story, Lost in the City, where all these events occur. I mean, it's not really even an event, it's kind of just a woman in a taxi getting lost. Of course, there's kind of a theme going throughout that's really interesting, and he kind of connects it at the end by telling a tale that this woman learned, that this woman was told by her mother, who just passed, which is kind of what sets the story in motion, about a woman who she knew who became a slave to her husband. She was so worried, so all the time being scared of him leaving, she just became his slave. Maybe I'll just read this ending. At New Jersey Avenue, the cab driver turned left, then right at Rhode Island, down past Fraser's funeral home. At a large apartment building on Rhode Island, where the Safeway now stood, they had lived on the same floor as the woman who was terrified that her husband would leave her. So all the time being scared of him leaving, her mother told Lydia years later, when she thought her daughter was old enough to understand. She just became his slave. He was a night foreman at a bakery way out in Northeast. I guess some thought he was a handsome man, but I never cared for him. Had what they call that good hair. Night and day she worried that he'd leave her. She begged me and all the other women not to take him from her. She wouldn't believe that I wasn't studying about him. She worried herself sick, and they came and took her away to St. Elizabeth's one day. In those days, they gave you $25 if you turned in a crazy person. $25 and a pat on the back. Somebody turned her in, but it wasn't me. It's such an interesting way you end a story about a moment with another story being told by someone that doesn't. It's so fascinating the way he does these things, and you can tell he's really thought them out in advance. I don't know if that point came across, but I love that ending, especially for, I think that was a shorter one too. But yeah, again, would highly recommend this. Thank you all so much for watching. I will have the video out with my dad very soon on White Noise. I'm super excited for that. It was an awesome experience. I have had just an amazing month of reading overall. It's just been great, even if I've been a little busy, but getting back into school soon. Lots of books are going to be read. I will kind of do a video previewing that. All the ones I'm going to read, so if anybody has like anything on their list and I'm going to be reading them, we can read it at the same time, whatever. But again, just thank you so much for watching. Great book. Love small things like these. Love White Noise. Just awesome month of reading, and I will see you guys soon.